What's your name?
Goldie Twat and the Three Hairs.
Hash Hush and Circle Up.
Welcome to On, the Hash House Harrier podcast for interviews, history, and stories. I'm your host, Ra.
Today on the podcast, we are in a little village in Germany in the home of a couple hashers. Today, we're going to feature just one of them. Welcome today on the podcast, longtime hasher, Sweet Transvestite. On in.
Cheers.
Let's tell people exactly where you are. What's the name of this village?
I live in the quaint village of Kweidelsbach in southwest Germany, near Ramstein Air Base. It's part of that big American military community.
Tell people your origin story. When, where, and how did you get to your first hash?
There I was a young second lieutenant in the Air Force on my very first duty station, Osan, Korea. I had seen these people running around the base occasionally and off base occasionally, had no idea what it was, but it looked interesting. One day, August 1994, there was a flyer at the post office talking about the Hash House Harriers, and Osan Bulgogi was having their run number 300. And they wanted to get 300 hashers on trail. So I was like, oh, that's who those guys are. Okay, sounds interesting. Oh, yeah, I'll do that. So I showed up. So I made myself come. No idea what I was getting into. From the very start, I was hooked. These are my people. This is great. I love this. And I continued hashing. I was just on a 1-year duty station tour there, but hashed quite a lot.
Who was there that day? Did they make 300? Did they
didn't quite make 300? What I do remember from that day that I loved was they had gotten all these red helium balloons and tied one off to every person on trail so they could keep track of anybody who got lost. Going through the market in Songtan, you wouldn't always be able to see the hashers or even the tops of their heads, but you saw these balloons bobbing around all over the place, which was fantastic.
That's great. Now I think that might be a good idea to give to people in the jungle, and then if you get lost, you can just release your balloon. People see one going up. Yeah, that's great.
I could have used that in Guam.
So how much of your year did you have left there to hash?
I arrived in March, and the following March is when I had to leave, and I squeezed in as many hashes as I could during that time. Haired a few, just really embraced it. I was there without my family. I had a wife and 2 kids in the U.S., but it was a remote tour. So this was a way to fill the time and have some fun. Met a lot of great people. I was trying to think of the names. It's so long ago, and I've got such a bad head for names as it is. The only couple of names I could remember were people I named. I got a bit of a reputation in the circle where when there was somebody who it was time to name them, but nobody had any kind of stories, I'd be the guy who would step forward and I would tell the most ridiculous story about this person that was 10% true. The truth part was, I met this guy 2 weeks ago, and then it would go from there. One guy, the one thing we knew about him is he loved to watch Knight Rider with David Hasselhoff. I don't know if he's still hashing, but he ended up being Jerk My Hasselhoff. The other guy, we knew nothing about him. So the story ended up becoming something about how one day when we were at the beach, he ended up giving oral sex to a dolphin, and he became Little Oral Annie.
Let me ask you about that hash. Osan Bulgogi, what was it like in 1994 in terms of civilian participation and locals?
So we had some. It was an interesting thing with Osan at the time was that the hash always started from the same location. And I didn't know any different. It was the only hash kennel I'd been a part of. But we would always start just inside the main gate. Sometimes the trail went through part of the base and emerged elsewhere. Sometimes it was entirely on the base. When it would go out the gate, there would be some of the locals who ran along. There was one in particular, though. It was this kid. I think he was only like 8 or 9 years old. He loved it. Every Saturday he'd be there. He'd be waiting and hoping we'd come out the gate, and he'd do the whole trail, just run along with us. Didn't speak any English. I'm hoping that kid is still hashing today.
Yeah, he's almost 40 years old. We got to
Yeah.
track that kid down. What about photos? Being military hash, did anyone take pictures and stuff? And was
Oh
there
yeah,
write-ups?
and I do actually still have some old photos from the hash. Not a lot, just a handful. The trails there were fantastic because Songtan, it's so much more built up today than it used to be. So we would get out the gate and go through town different ways, then get outside the town into the hills, through the rice paddies and all that kind of thing. Yeah, great trails there.
Circles outside the base?
It would depend on where the hare decided to lay the trail. A lot of the time, yes. It was a lot of people turning out for the hash back then. It's a remote duty station, so people didn't necessarily have a lot else to do. And man, we would have sometimes 150 hashers easy on a trail in summertime, a good day, and circles that would just go on and eventually devolve into everybody just drifting off into the bars and so forth.
Did you get involved any way else there besides getting a lot of namings and herring?
At that, I was still pretty new and just along for the ride and having a good time. Following that, once I got back to the States and got back with my wife, and we had 2 young kids, and I just put it aside as that was fun and didn't really think about it, which is a shame because my next duty station was in Boston. That would have been great. It just never even occurred to me to look them up, unfortunately. So I went subsequently for a period of a couple of years that I didn't hash. Actually, not quite 2 years. Then I ended up going to some training in Florida, in Panama City. I discovered the Panama City Hash House Harriers. Did some great trails with them while I was down there for about 4 months. Then it was after that I ended up in Italy, northern Italy, up in Aviano, and there was no kennel there at the time. Closest one was the Royal Milan and Bordighera. At some point, it occurred to me it'd be great to go do some hashing again. And I convinced this friend of mine to go. We drove all the way down to Milan, a few hours on the autostrada, and hashed with them. It was Buona and Paint Stripper and Sofa and Tone Deaf and some folks you probably know. Great time with those guys. My friend got named on his very first hash. He was stretching before the trail. And somebody asked him, "Are you stretching? What are you doing?" And he's, "No, I'm just here on the ground going fetal." To this day, he's going fetal.
Yeah.
But on the drive back, he had such a great time. And we kicked the idea around and decided, you know what, we need to start a kennel. Aviano's a good place to do it. We need to start one up. So that was the first time that I really got involved in like mismanagement, was founding the Aviano kennel.
We want to talk about that process of starting a club and when that was. But I'm just going to tell the people, if you're listening to this, and you usually listen to this, is a good part to go back and watch it. But I think it's going to be visual when you find out the naming story here. There might be some more visuals. And this flag is your background. It's got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, indigo on hers. What's their flag from?
Where did I get this one?
It's not club branded.
No, it's not. It's basically a pride flag for people on the LGBTQ spectrum who are hashers. Somebody was selling them. I think it might have been an Interhash in Goa, but somebody who had haberdashery had this, and I was like, "Oh, that's awesome! I want that." So that's all it is. I'll throw this up on the wall anytime I travel hashing.
Yeah, it's a big, very easy to see. Let's talk about founding a club now. Let's tell the story. Which came first, you founding this club or getting named?
Oh, naming. Yeah. So
Okay, what's that
Yeah.
story?
Osan back then, the tradition was you got named on your 5th hash or 6th if they didn't get around to it. And one thing Osan did so well back then was each incremental step you took with another trail was another step towards a thing. Your first hash, you got a whistle because you're going to need a whistle on trail. Your 5th hash, you got a bell, little bell that you could carry, and it went on from there. And anytime you haired a trail, the hares would all go to one of the local bag shops, and we get those embroidered luggage tags with the number of the trail and the name that we had given the trail. I've actually still got 1 or 2 of those. I've got a hash horn, and those are on the horn, so I've still got those from all that time ago. The naming It's not, I guess it's a decent story. It's a good enough naming, but there were only 2 names nominated. I got the second one. That is because my friends who were there knew that in college, my big thing was I got into the Rocky Horror Picture Show with friends and would go like it almost every weekend, sometimes Friday and Saturday. And this was just the thing that we did. The story they were telling was about that, and that I had seen Rocky Horror Picture Show more than 100 times in the movie theater. The only 2 names that got nominated, somebody nominated Pelvic Thrust, and then somebody nominated Sweet Transvestite, and they're like, yep, we're done, Sweet Transvestite. You had mentioned the visual stuff. So this is my original Osan Bulgogi t-shirt. And this is what they used to give you when you were leaving. It's got Sweet Transvestite written on it, also in Hangul. And they used to give you one of these if you've been in the kennel for a while and it was time for you to head out.
So at Rocky Horror, you never dressed up to go on stage. You sat in the seats?
Initially, yeah. And eventually post-college, but before I got into the military, I was living in Arizona. And there was one of those groups that performs the movie in front of the movie. And I got involved with one of those groups for a little while. I was just the narrator, the criminologist guy. But because there's a hierarchy there, you can't be Frankenfurter when you just showed up. Somebody else is doing that, buddy. You got to wait your turn.
Yeah, there's going to be fights. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's how Sweet Transvestite came about.
But you have then picked up the Frankenfurter gear.
Over the years, yeah. And I have been gifted some hash apparel. There's this great shirt. It's in a box in the other room. The shirt is Frankenfurter's outfit, essentially, but with on stuff on it, hash patches and so forth as well. It was somebody did a great job designing that one. As well as you saw at Eurohash, I have basically got the whole ensemble at this point.
All right. Naming and starting this club. Tell me about the process and the tradition transfer then from Osan and Panama. How different was Panama, and what did you say? Okay, this is what our hash.
Panama was when I realized, oh, you don't always have to start in the same place, which okay, that's a good thing. Something I enjoyed there that I'd also enjoyed at Osan was that it was a singing hash. So you get a different song for every down, which I've always enjoyed the hashes that have that tradition. Didn't know a whole lot more aside from that, other than I've now been to Milan but didn't care. My buddy, he'd only been to one hash, but he was like, I'm on board. So going fetal was the Biermeister. He was super impressed. The Biermeister at Milan at the time, you didn't show up to a beer check and simply get a little cup full of beer. No, my friend, you would show up to a beer check and there would be prosciutto and grapes and prosecco.
Nice.
And the end of trail, there was even more. It was fantastic. So he emulated that. Thankfully, there was another much more experienced hasher in Aviano at the time called Who Gas. Who Gives a Shit? And Who Gives a Shit had been doing this for a much longer period of time. The guy was a chief master sergeant. It was just the 3 of us decided, okay, let's make this work. Early days of the internet, we threw together like a GeoCities website. We posted up a few flyers around. I reached out to some other kennels that I'd met people from these kennels. So actually, come to think of it, no, I must have gone somewhere because I knew some of these folks. And I'm talking like, oh my goodness. The ones I mentioned from Milan, Automatic Balls, some of these folks who've been around in Europe for a long time, and told them, hey, we're starting up this kennel and love it if you want to come down and be there for the run number 1 of the Aviano Friuli hash house areas.
What year?
I was gifted this as well. Run number 1, August 22nd, 1998.
Nice.
So still got this with the original patch and so forth. Pretty worn out. Actually, there was a run before that though, because we needed to work out the bugs before we had other people show up. Who Gas was the RA. I was the GM. Going Fetal was the Biermeister. That's all we had. And we did a run number 0, which was like about 2 weeks before this one. And
How much of the dress up stuff did you do before you had run one? Logo, anything?
I've always enjoyed doing that kind of stuff. I don't know if you can really make it out here, but the logo is here from the original
Up
Aviano Freely.
higher.
Here he's holding up some
Higher.
wine.
Right, higher. There we go. So yeah, we can see a rabbit. Oh yeah, there he is.
Yeah.
AFHT, AFH3. Yeah.
Yep. So I designed a logo, threw that up on the website, and we were off to the races. Didn't know what we were doing. We were just having a good time.
Day of the week, time. How'd you figure
This
that?
we did Saturdays and only every other week. I think on a normal hash, the most we ever managed to get out was like 20 on a really good day. But we did a couple of events. I was there until the end of 2000. So this was from August 98 till 2000. We threw together a few events. One we did was a camp out. Somebody worked at a horse ranch and we were able to camp out there, and we did a roasted pig, and it was the hot, horrible days of summer in the middle of early August in Italy. So we went up into the mountains to an area that we knew where there was a lake and nice area to cool off. So that was fun. The big one that we did was Italian Nash Hash for 2000, which wasn't even our responsibility. We hadn't bid on it, hadn't said we wanted to do it, but the guys down in Sicily, they were supposed to do it. They shot an email out to all the Italian hashers and said, we can't do it. It's not happening. Sorry, there won't be an Italian Nash Hash this year. Everything's falling apart. We just can't do it. And we're like, that sucks. It'd be nice if we had one, but okay. Then I was kicking ideas around with the other guys, and I said, you know what, screw it. Let's just do this. So we did. We, in the course of about 2 months, scraped together a plan and hosted Italian Nash Hash 2000, which was remarkable for a few things. For an event we just threw together, we had 100 hashers all in one hotel. I think the first ever hash trail in Venice, on the island of Venice. Also, the worst hash trail in Venice, on the island of Venice, because me and 4 other hares, we get out there early and we're going to prelay the trail and have it all ready to go. And we were running late, getting it done. And everybody's hanging out at the train station. Thank God we got some other hashers there who were like singing songs and keeping things happy and light. So we show up almost an hour late. And they're like, all right, the trail's good to go. And we do some quick introductions and we start. Finally, we're on trail. And then the rain starts. And that whole trail that we had laid was wiped out. And it was not mild rain. It was pouring down. So we did the whole trail live in the rain, trying to keep people on track and so forth. Yeah, it was awful. The circle location wasn't going to work. Ended up doing the circle back at the hotel later. So good times and some great people.
So who was the big attenders? Rome? Who were the big clubs from?
Yeah, back then Rome was going strong. Oh, by the way, Errol had brought this one out from the archives as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
That's the
that's
official
right.
shirt. So there
Oh,
we go.
nice. Yeah.
So I had by that time hashed more around the rest of Italy, especially Rome was really going strong. And I have tried all day to remember this guy's name. I know him, and it's funny, I can remember his real name. His real name was Robert Rose. He worked at the Canadian Embassy, and he was high up at the Canadian Embassy there. And great
He's
guy.
on Facebook. He's on Facebook.
Yeah. We had hatch parties at his amazing house that him and his wife had, like a penthouse place in the middle of Rome. Fantastic. And hatching was going pretty strong. I was great friends with Fabulous, who's one of my favorite RAs of all time. He ran a great circle. Pescara had the Adriatic Hash House Harriers, who were still going pretty well at that time. There was a whole American expat community that worked there. I can't remember who it was they worked for, but the company ended up closing that location, and then the hash died after that.
That's an interesting point about that time, the expat boom, that you hit it at the end of the 90s.
Yeah.
And from the 80s, it started, and the 90s exploded in the US. Yeah, these towns with hashes. And if you had to guess, how many of those Italian clubs have folded? What
I was looking them up. I know Aviano Friuli that I started is still around, but it changed when I left it's now Chile Madness. So that's still going. Vicenza Derelicts has come and gone. I don't know their current status. Rome, unfortunately, it's nothing like it was in its heyday at this point. I think they still hash some. The guys down in Sicily do still hash, and Napoli, I do not know.
Did you guys have anything come up through the time when you left Aviano? Issues with the public? What was hash known? How much of an appearance did you make to people?
We never had any issues that were specifically hash related. There was a huge political thing that happened during the time I was there, an incident where some Marine Corps pilots flew too low and hit the cable of a cable car that was full of people and severed it. And those people plunged to their deaths. And there was huge anti-American sentiment for a while because of that. That was, completely non-hash related. Fortunately, never really had any issues. And there was a lot of Italian participation in the kennels too, which was helpful, so that if you did have an issue, somebody would smooth it over and it'd be no problem and everything's fine. Yeah, that was a great period. And people were coming up with amazing ideas. One of the best things I ever did hashing to this day was the Coast to Colosseum. The hashers in Pescara and in Rome somehow hatched this ridiculous plan. They hired a bus with a driver. We started in Pescara, and it was just however many would fit on the bus, 50 of us. Everybody started with a toe dipped in the Adriatic. And we did the first 5K together to a restaurant. Most of the hashers, then 95% of us, had a lovely dinner. But some people continued the trail, because what the trail was a 222-kilometer long trail from the coast at the Adriatic all the way to the Colosseum in Rome. And it took us 24 hours. The way it worked was after the dinner, everybody loads on the bus. Everybody had signed up in advance, and there was a whole sheet of who was going to run when and how long were they going to run. For some people, like this one guy, Duracell, I think did 25 kilometers in a single stretch.
But somebody did all two together, all the kilometers.
Exactly. At all times, there was one hasher on trail. It was a relay. So the bus would drive up ahead and park somewhere. And by the way, we were just partying on that bus. It was a great time. Then eventually somebody would tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey, your time's coming up. You got to get off. Okay, 4 people would get off. They'd pile into this chase car that we had, sober driver, thankfully. And they were in charge for the next 20, 25, 30K of staggering out the runners who were going to do those bits. My bit was at 2 a.m. and we're not on the main highway. We're on these side roads. So I'm running along this road and doing my 10K under just the most crystal clear, starry sky out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm just thinking to myself, this is ridiculous. And I love it. This is such a crazy idea. And so we tagged off hasher to hasher until finally we're in Rome, and everybody got off the bus and did the last 5K together to finish at the Colosseum. And then we just had an epic circle. And then everybody went over to Robert Rose's house. I wish I could remember his hash name. And we had an epic party, people just crashing out everywhere to sleep the night off. And it was so glorious that the next year we all did it again the other way. And we started at the Colosseum and we went all the way to Pescara. And yeah, still one of my greatest memories of hashing. Just the audacity of that ridiculous idea.
What was the age range of people on the bus?
It was pretty wide. Yeah, I had a couple hashers that I had brought from our kennel, and there were 1 or 2 from some of the other military-oriented kennels. So you get the younger hashers there. Some of these guys were like 20, 21 years old. And then some of the older hashers, I don't know if we had anybody who was 60, but pretty close.
Yeah.
A pretty wide age range.
When did you see walking? At what point did this just up there until the early 2000s? Did you see that the hash was mainly runners? And when was that changing in these Europe very active, often military connected clubs?
Mm-hmm. In the military connected clubs, everyone's got fitness standards in the military. So typically it's runners. But you get people who I've had an injury or I'm just hungover today or whatever. So most kennels I've been to, there's always a few walkers in the mix. That has been perilous, I have found, when I've occasionally met up with a kennel that are serious runners, because I am a slow but steady kind of person. I am not going to be an FRB unless I've been clever enough to figure out the checks and so forth. So I get in with some of those kennels occasionally, and I find myself bringing up the rear trying to find the checks so I can get there, and I show up half an hour later than everybody else. Yeah, there's been some change over the years, especially in the American kennels I've seen. When I went back to the US, following Aviano, I was in Oklahoma City, and with the Oklahoma City Wild West Hash House Harriers, which was also going pretty strong at the time. Ended up being an RA and a haberdasher and some other stuff there. A great bunch of people, and then came back to there.
Were you a tinker?
Yeah, it was at Tinker Air Force Base. But it was about 10 years later that I cycled back there, and the hash had changed completely to where the group of people that were keeping the kennel alive, there was one day that the trail was literally, we're going to go around the strip mall and then into the bar. And that's what it was. The kennel was being run, not going to shame anybody for their body type and so forth, but it was people who wouldn't be capable of running over 300 pounds easily and so forth. But they still loved hashing. At least they loved the traditions of it and the idea of it and so forth. But it was almost exclusively trails for walkers at that point. That really caught me off guard when I rotated back there and it had changed into that.
Let's at some point blend in here the fact you are a bottom feeder. Maybe you're a hashing family. So
yeah.
we call it a bottom feeder if you met your partner on the hash. Is that the situation with you guys?
No, we didn't exactly meet at the hash, but I got her started into hashing pretty quickly. Actually, she had hashed once or twice. So I guess we could say she was a hasher when we met. Yeah. So my wife is Goldie Twat and the Three Hairs. Actually, my previous wife was also a hasher, Royal Canadian Mountain, who still good friends with her, thankfully.
No, what about the kids? Have they been on hashes?
Absolutely, yeah. All four of them. I have two boys from my first marriage, and Goldie has two who I'm proud to call my own as their stepdad as well. And they've all hashed. My oldest son, initially when he got into hashing, was in Aviano. When I left Aviano, he had just turned 10. So it was like in the ages of 8 to 10 that I was running the kennel. And he would come out, sometimes help me scout trails and do stuff. And he thought it was fun. His younger brother was only like 6 to 8. So he would just show up for the beginning, but wouldn't actually come out on trail or anything. Daniel got his hash name then, which was Game Boy, because he always had a Game Boy in his hand. So it was great hash name for a kid. Eventually, when he got older, he still had an interest. We would meet up sometimes and I would take him on trail. And many years later, when I was back in Europe and running with the C.R.A.P hash, we renamed him and gave him a proper hash name. And I have to thank Local Yokel for this amazing hash name that he's got. Game Boy had been telling some stories, and Local was a little drunk. He's got his accent, which is great. It gets only stronger when he's had a few. And he was like, "What's the name of that song again?" So Daniel, I should say, he grew up in Italy with my ex-wife. And so he goes, "What's the name of that song?" He goes, "I tie titty titty pom pom pom." And to this day, he is I tie titty titty pom pom pom.
Oh my God.
He loves to introduce himself with that.
Yeah.
We still have done a few things. He doesn't hash very actively, but we did do together a Euro hash Scotland on the cruise, which was great. And occasionally one or two other things. I'll drag them out too.
Let's talk about the traditions, what you've seen on the whole scope of this now. As you said, hashes have become more inclusive to non-runners, and certainly in the States, there's some drinking, there's some intense shiggy runs there too. It's all over the map. But what about behavior, political correctness, drinking, and everything else? What are your thoughts on all that over the scope? What do you think?
I think, as has always been, it just depends so much on where are you in this big world of hashing. I went hashing in Malaysia some years back, and I don't think it was much different than it has been forever since it first started there. Some of the kennels here in Europe still maintaining. What you do, though, see here in Europe, though, is the median age keeps creeping up. There's some younger hashers coming out. Is it enough to sustain hashing long term? That I don't know. I think maybe yes in some of the larger metropolitan areas, but some of these kennels in these smaller areas, it may not be. As far as political correctness and all that kind of thing, I think I've seen that more so in the US with the younger hashers there, where sometimes the jokes that used to go over really well aren't received very well anymore, or even a few of the songs. There's a little bit more sensitivity about that. Also, part of what I've seen with the younger generation is that alcohol is not as popular anymore, which to a degree, hashing is all about both drinking and running. When they're not drinkers, they're not necessarily going to be as interested in coming out to the running.
I don't know how much of a force the hash is as a marketing thing, but some beer companies worldwide ought to say, we want to be the non-alcoholic beer sponsor of the hash worldwide.
Oh, gosh.
Boy, well, what an opportunity, because they certainly have to change what they're selling.
Yeah. On the other hand, I've seen it the other side too. In Okinawa, I was there for 4.5 years, and RA and a GM for the Okinawa hash. The younger generation that's turning out for the hash there, drinking is a competitive sport. But that again is the military community. So maybe that's part of it.
Yeah. Let's talk about hash traditions in terms of you're almost always, if you're going to be somewhere for a while, you're going to be GM, you're going to be RA, it seems. And we've been in circles together. We've shared running circles together. How are you when you're not in charge? So how are you at the circle these days when you're not in charge?
When I attend a hash and I'm not in charge, one, it's just freeing. Like, I am not in charge. I am just along for the ride, and I'm just going to sit back and have a good time. I try to participate. I do have to admit that I'm occasionally, I don't voice this, but I can be fairly critical of the RA. Like sometimes I'm sitting back, oh man, come on, get it together. This circle has potential. You gotta bring it in. But I'm happy sometimes just being a $5 hasher. That is great. I'm a little more, I guess, selective about when I want to step up and be in charge. But I think a lot of people have that experience where if you've done RA, GM, a lot of the time, it's nice to take a break from it and step back and be more selective. Right now, I'm not currently doing weekly hashing with the kennel. I'm just doing travel hashing, select events. I'm also running Venice Kilt. I'm the GM for the Venice Kilt Hash House Harriers, but that's just one event that I have to organize per year.
When is that event?
That is coming up this year, the weekend of April the 11th. And it's for 70 hashers. In the past, it's typically been limited to about 45 because of the size of the bar where we would have the big party at the end. I found a better venue that is a little cheaper and bigger. And so now this year we're doing 70. We could have done more, but the trick with Venice Kilt is it is in no way sanctioned by the government of the island of Venice. So you have to fly below the radar a little bit. We don't want to get hundreds of people or anything of that sort of nature. So I'm very selective, like what part of Venice are we going to lay trail in, and we avoid the touristy areas and all that kind of thing.
You've been doing the travel hashing to the big events, Euro, Goa, Interhash, Interscandia. I saw you at those all three.
Sure.
What about when you are part of mismanagement or running circles? What's the sizes you like? Where's the sweet spot range for you? And when does it get too big or too small?
When running a circle, I like the circle to be big enough that it's not just you and a handful of friends standing around. So at least 20, 25 people. But I also don't want it to be too big, because my goal when I'm running circle as the RA is that at some point, I'm going to get every one of you in here for something, because everybody deserves a chance to come in and participate. I always take the perspective when I'm the RA that I am just here to facilitate everybody else's good time, to be quick and lively and so forth, faster, funnier, and just keep it moving so that we can get on to the next guy and the next thing. You know how it is. You have to read the crowd, know when it's time to speed it up, know when it's time to wrap it up, all that kind of thing. I think a big circle would be maybe 60 or 70 people. I do, for example, Interscandia did it well, where they divided up into circles based on the trail you did, and each one had roughly 50, 60 people, 70 maybe at the most, and that was good. Any larger than that, and the hash is out of control. And there's private parties going on all over the place, and nobody can hear, and people are getting upset because they want to hear what the person in the circle is trying to say and telling a story. Yeah, it's better that way. And then if people are going to have private parties, okay, fine, but go over there.
What's the laundry list of all? What name off? Go through your calendar in your mind. Then where else did you go? And just put them in order. Once you left Aviano, we got Guam, we got Okinawa, we got all.
So my kids actually got me the greatest Father's Day present years ago, and we took a trip to Korea. This while we lived in Japan. I was able to get this hat made that has.
Oh yeah, all the
flags
countries you've been.
At that time, all the countries I'd hashed in,
Yeah.
and then below
that's
each
cool.
one
Oh
is
wow,
the abbreviation of
embroidered.
the kennel. Yeah.
Wow.
And then on the top, it's big events. Is that right? So yeah. So it's like Euro hash, Inter hash, Nash hashes, all these things. But that's travel hashing, a lot of it. So I left Italy and went to Oklahoma City, Wild West. We also hashed a lot with Texoma. Then there for 4 years. Then I got a duty station in Germany. But I was up in the northwest of Germany in Geilenkirchen, where it was a little too small to have a kennel. The nearest kennel was the C.R.A.P hash. And so I would drive about an hour to get over to Cologne. Made some fantastic friends there. Like I mentioned, local yokel, one of my dear friends, Palm Fritz, who sadly is not with us anymore. He and I were great friends. Ended up being an RA with them. We had some great times, great parties. After that, I ended up in Greece for 2 years. But I was at a small NATO facility in central Greece, in Lara, where there's really no American community, no expat community. So the only hashing I did during that time was travel hashing. Like Palm Fritz and I met up in Antalya, Turkey, went to Eurohash over there, I think it was Swiss Nash hash and German Nash hash and a couple things like that. After that, briefly touched base back in Oklahoma. That was when I touched base back there and was like, what happened?
What about Oklahoma itself? I've been at Tinker Air Force Base, and I've been through there. What do you think happened to Oklahoma? That wasn't that long a period where you were away.
Yeah, I don't know. So when I was there the first time around, and the Oklahoma City Wild Wild West was going strong, it was Little Red Pipe Rider and Upchug and Nutless Professor and a lot of really great hashers. It was fun and exciting, and we were constantly coming up with ideas, and there were great places all over the city that you could do trails. One of my many hash babies, that maybe the hash name I'm proudest of, Norman Master Bates. So he's still a good friend. That guy's awesome. He's helped keep that kennel going. And then the change, it's hard to say. Sometimes it's just personality driven, where if the people who are putting forth the time and the effort and the energy to keep it going have to move on some other place. they leave a space and a void, and there's not always somebody to move into that, or there's not always somebody who has the right talent or drive or know how to keep it going. It may have just been that. It's possible. Yeah, I wasn't involved in the interim. After that is when we ended up in Okinawa, and man, Okinawa hash was going strong. Those were some of the best trails I've done in my life. I love a good shiggy hash through some really interesting terrain, and that island has that in spades. Plus, you do these amazing trails, you get filthy dirty, and then you end on a beach, and everybody just goes in the ocean, and it's just such a fantastic place. I really got into herring big time while I was there, and had so much fun. I'd be driving around the island, I'd see a little trail. I wonder where that goes. And hey, yeah, grab one of the kids and the dogs and let's go explore and see where this ends up. Found amazing stuff, saw amazing things, met amazing people. It was great that there is still Japanese participation in that hatch, or Okinawans. Some really great people, Ask Mechanic and Omikaze. I was fortunate to be the GM when Okinawa had its 3,500th run, and we organized a really big party for that. We got in touch with Jock, who I know you've interviewed before.
Wow, yeah.
And he flew over, and we treated that man like royalty that weekend. I think he had no complaints because he constantly had all these hairy-ups that were just taking.
Jock's funny. I haven't talked to him in a while. I don't know how he's actually doing right now, but quite a while up until a few months ago, I would get a butt dial from him regularly about once every 10 days. I didn't talk to him that much, but I must have gone on his phone number. So I'd get a bunch of phone calls and I'd be, Jock, check your. He is a great guy and a great attitude. That's pretty cool to have met. Did you ever meet him before you brought him over?
No, I never met him. There were a few of the really truly like old heads on the island who knew him and had hatched with him before he left. But nope, never met the guy. But yeah, great dude. And I think we showed him a really good time. We did a trail for the actual 3,500 that showcased the best of Okinawa. It was in the hills. You had to get on the monorail and go down to the beach. And we went like beach and through the water. Then we went through the city and the market and just all the things. Then we finished on this hill in this beautiful park and had just a huge spread of food and a big party. That's one of those events that sometimes you organize an event and afterwards you're left thinking, God, I wish we'd done this right. I wish we'd done that. That one worked out, except for one thing, which we nearly lost Jock because when we got to the end of trail, and when you got to the monorail stops, you didn't know which stop you had to go to. There was somebody there who would tell you. And Jock was lagging behind a bit. The person who was supposed to tell him where to go at the last stop had left, and he didn't know what stop to go to. And we start getting text messages from him, and we were able to communicate enough to like talk him on to the right location and get him there. So we finished the trail. And then the story of like, he was stuck at that train station and didn't really have the right people's phone numbers. And he was like, I'll be damned if I am not going to finish this trail. And through a series of phone calls to different people, he somehow managed to get one of our numbers and was able to get in contact so that we could talk him on to, okay, this is where you need to go next.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
How many people about made that?
For that event, quite a few. We advertised it. People came in from Taiwan and all over. So almost like a little Natch hash. We had about 120, I think. Yeah, not too bad. It was good. And we did it in a way that has become my preferred way of doing an event if I'm organizing the event. It's great when you do the tough work of finding a hatch hotel or a place that will, that you can stuff everybody into, that doesn't mind the craziness and the shenanigans and so forth. That's a challenge though. And then you got to deal with the place if things go bad or whatever. So the way I prefer to do it these days is like with Venice Kilt. This is how we do it. We recommend some places but where you stay is completely up to you. What we do is we share the agenda. Okay, the trail on this day will start in this location. Here's how you get there. Here's the time you need to be there. Here's a bar nearby if you want to show up early, get a drink. And everybody shows up. We do great trail. We have a circle. We make sure they know where we're going to have on after and so forth. But it's self-catered. That has worked out on a couple of occasions great. And especially in the case of Venice Kilt, because some people want to be budget conscious. Great. There's a hostel right over here. And that's our base of operations, because that bar in the hostel is a 24-hour bar. Then some people want to spend some money and stay on the island and have it all romantic because they're with their, wife or girlfriend or whatever, or significant other. And okay, fine. Have fun. I like doing it that way. The last year, Venice Kilt went great time. Everybody was really complimentary. And not trying to brag, but I ran the event by myself. We had 50 hashers, no accidents, no incidents. Everybody knew where to go, and it just went well. But all I had to be, it was just organization, letting people know the information, and then I'd scouted the trails out way in advance and figured things out.
Let's talk about the reality of bigger events. Some people do want for the glory or for whatever, they want to put on the big event.
Yeah, God bless.
Continental, international, even some NASH events are big, and
Yeah.
housing and things. And sometimes I think, boy, if you could just have someone who was dedicated, a travel agent said, I'm going to do this, and they understood hashing. What do you think about that in terms of people making money on the big events? We all know, hey, there's too much on some of these big events to, worry about inside the details. And we spend a lot of money. Hash coming to a place is a big economic boom, and somebody's making money off us. And sometimes hashers sell cruises before and after. What about the idea of that? How do you feel as a $5 hasher going to a regoed hasher to event? Do you care? What do you think of that stuff?
Kind of two minds on the subject. I don't want to discriminate against the $5 hasher. So it's great if there's the budget option, whatever. It's egalitarian, everybody can participate and so forth. If you can get yourself there, great. You're part of the event. Then there's prelubes. Some of those prelube cruise down the Danube, these kind of things that can get up into the thousands of dollars. And if people have the money and they want to do it, okay, have at it. More power to you. As for profiting off of it, this is where I'm of two minds, because I don't necessarily want to see people ripping off their fellow hashers, of course, or even giving that perception of in any way. But man, it's hard work. Like, you see the work that Higgins and Neptunus put into the last Eurohash out there. You see the work the guys in Goa put into trying to make that event happen, especially under the circumstances post-COVID and all the thrash of where's Interhash going to be even. So much effort and time and energy goes into it that it would be fair to get something from it. But I don't know. I don't know that it necessarily has to be money. I'll tell you what, if you were hiring somebody to organize those events and put that amount of time into it and all the hours and hours of work that go into it, if you were hiring somebody, that's a significant chunk of change that you would have to pay for somebody to manage all those logistics and all that stuff that goes down. That's where I really admire the fact that there are still groups of hashers who come together. I'm looking forward to Eurohash this year, Tallinn, and I really hope that they got a great plan and that it all comes together and there's no issues. I love seeing the satisfaction among the group when it all goes well, but at the same time, when it doesn't go well, I can empathize, and I feel
there's nowhere to hide.
Yeah, exactly. Years ago, Eurohash in Antalya. I had a wonderful time. Pomfrets had a wonderful time. The people we were with had a wonderful time because there were two places that you could stay. Where you ended up was a little luck of the draw and a little bit like when did you sign up. And there was the main resort on the beach where all the events were taking place. And then there was another place just down the road. But the problem was it was an all-inclusive resort, and they didn't want to let those people in to enjoy the resort unless they were paying customers. So you ended up with this real two-tier kind of thing where they weren't allowed in except when the parties were happening, and then only into the area where the party was taking place. They couldn't even get in to hang out with their friends, this kind of thing. There was a lot of hurt feelings and people who were pretty salty about that kind. But that's the difficulty with these events. And that's where it is helpful if you have people who know what they're doing. Obviously, some people are professionals. So I can see, I would think that if they were getting paid, if they were taking money, they would have to walk a fine line. I think the big thing is transparency. For example, when I organized the Venice Kilt, I maintain a spreadsheet that shows where every single dollar is going, and anybody who wants to see that spreadsheet, I will gladly show it to them to show that I'm not lining my pocket in any way, shape, or form. And if they were going to use professional services or even call themselves like, hey, as the organizer, I am donating my services. Okay, but be open and transparent about it. I think where you would really run into trouble is when you don't tell people and then they find out, what do you mean he got $500? And then clearly that person is going to get lynched the next time they show up at a hash circle.
It's interesting. I'm trying to think. There are other organizations or other groups of friends that put events, so to speak, on. But something like the hash, with some of the scale of these, and there's so many people that say, I am not going to make a single dollar off this. That's a rare thing.
When I do it for the joy of the event, like when I put an event together, I want everybody to just have a great time. And I get such a thrill out of being able to take a step back and look around and be like, this is great. This is a party with all these great people who are my friends, and we are all having a good time. And that's on the best of days. And then there's those times that it doesn't go so well, and there's logistics issues or the weather is bad, and then just feel terrible when that happens.
So what's going to be the future as far as arc of your life and hashing? How long will you likely be in Germany?
So fortunately, my active duty military days are behind me. And so I am a happily retired officer now, have a great job as a contractor here. I do modeling and simulation for training US and NATO, Army, Air Force, and Navy, basically in these big video game simulations, how to work together. I love my job. I love being here, and the job offers the opportunity to stay here basically as long as the contract is here and as long as the military wants us to keep doing what we're doing. I'm taking advantage of that and enjoying Europe and travel hashing and getting out to different places that I hadn't been before. So this is me for a while here in Europe. We had registered for New Zealand. Wish we could have gone, and then unfortunately circumstances stepped in, and I'd love to get back to Okinawa. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Goa was a big thing for us. We'd never been in that part of Asia. Fantastic time though. Again, like anybody watching this who was on that committee, kudos, because I thought Goa was fantastic. Had a great time there. There are so many camels in Europe still, and so many events still that either haven't done yet, or that was my first Interscandy. I've only been to Brzuba once, and that was a long time ago. I'd love to go back to that sometime. I have the luxury of time on my side. It's okay, let's look at the calendar for next year. And what things do we want to sign up for? Where can we squeeze this into the schedule?
Yeah, it's interesting. The calendar's different than it was when you started. When you started, there was interhash and the continental hashes and a Nash hash or two, and not so much. And now the calendar is packed as far as you want to go and travel. Let me thank you for everything you've done.
I forgot to mention that part of what helped me out when I was all those years ago in Aviano, starting that hash and trying to get back into it and trying to figure out where stuff was happening. Somehow I found out about this guy who had like an email list that he would shoot information out to. Some guy in Cairo, Matt something, and got on his roster, and that was really helpful.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that Cairo is one of those cities when we think about it, that when I was there starting in the late 80s, that it boomed with that combination of things of there wasn't that much to do yet in some of these less developed cities,
Mhm.
but it was very safe for kids and families. So we would do 100, 150 people. Then with the nature of the world changing, especially non-military aid and development, it shrunk. There's a handful of people in some of those places. So
Yeah,
they're
the
still
impact
there, but
it's not what it was at one time. But I do appreciate you, Rob, that you did help me get back into it back then when I needed the help.
that's great. Anybody else, any other stories you want to get in, any other people you want to mention so you can have lunch with Goldie Twats?
Oh my gosh. I had written a few ideas down, but there's just too much. Best naming ever. There was a hasher in Okinawa that we were going to name something like 8-ball in the butt based off of some story. There's a tradition in Okinawa where as you're coming back to the circle for your naming, everybody yells, shoot the moon, and you bend over and you moon the hash and so forth. This girl's coming back and we picked out the name and shoot the moon. So she bends over, she flips her skirt up, and there is a tampon string hanging down between her legs.
Oh, yeah.
And we all went, nope, stop, go away. So now to this day, she is Blood Moon, which that was one of my favorite namings. There was the Mount Finansanta disaster in Guam. I was there for the world's worst hash trail ever when Viagra sent the entire pack the wrong way, and we ended up stuck on a mountainside till 3 a.m. in the freezing rain. People had heat exhaustion, and then we nearly froze to death before some people could show up with a rope to help us get off the mountain.
Wow.
There's 2 issues of Harrier Magazine have that story because they approached me for it. And I wrote the whole thing up for them. But that is a crazy story. If you ever want to do another episode on just that, we could easily fill the time. It was the worst hash trail ever. Never forget it. Oh, and then half the pack got leptospirosis afterwards, which included me. So that was also a good time. Some of the fun stuff that I came up with for hashing. The clothing, when I was in Oklahoma City, I would try and come up with fun stuff on trail, something new and different. So I invented a trail mark, the CX, for a clothing exchange. And everybody's like, what's that? And so now that's spread. And to this day, I'll see like somebody will use a clothing exchange. But when you go up to somebody, you're like, oh, I invented that mark. They look at you like, oh, sure you did.
Somebody had to, yeah.
Exactly. I do want to add this because this is one of my favorite things, and everybody should try this sometime if you're running a kennel and you're trying to think of fun things to do. The brown bag hash. We did this in Okinawa where there's a store called Don Quixote where you can go and easily get like crazy costume stuff. The idea was like one of those brown grocery sacks that you can't see into, but any kind of bag is fine. You show up at the hash with a sack, and inside of it is a costume item of some kind. Doesn't matter what it is. Everybody throws the bags in a big pile. Then just before trail, as we're doing introductions and everything, everybody has to go grab a bag that isn't theirs, that they don't know what's inside. And whatever's in the bag, you have to wear it on trail, the whole trail. Man, that was so much fun because some people would open it and it's a crazy pair of glasses or a hat. Other times it was an entire Power Ranger outfit. Or something of that nature. There's a guy, Karaoke Unicorn Nut Tugger, good friend, big dude, and him squeezing his big body into a red Power Ranger suit to wear on trail was a sight I'll never forget. Good times. Plenty of stories that still to be told, but
I think
hashing
we'll-
for 30 years, obviously you're going to have a lot of good stories.
Yeah, I hope that CX idea is heard by a few people and try it out. Maybe some people comment and call in and see what happened.
So the way it works is that when you hit the CX, you have to pick somebody and exchange an article of clothing, and you can't change it back until the circle when the RA tells you it's okay to do so.
Yeah, you don't get to keep it, so you can't steal somebody's shirt that you want, but you can wear it for
Right.
the rest of the
Occasionally, though, once some really sweaty hashes, it's no, I don't want that back. It's okay.
That's great. All right, enjoy your lunch. This has been great. We'll see you this summer. and on trail along places. And
Yeah, are you coming out to your hash, or am I going to see you in Thailand?
I am.
Okay, one person wants to say hi real quick.
Yeah.
Say hi to all the people.
Yeah, there she is.
Goldie Twat and the three hairs.
Hi, y'all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, this has been
Awesome.
Yeah. Let me ask kind of on the nostalgic side. Anybody's been hashing as long as you have across 2 millennia into 4 decades, we've lost hashers. Anybody else that you think of that people, smile when they think of?
the two who come to mind for me, Palm Fritz, absolutely. That guy was a dear friend. Another dear friend, though, she was a hasher in Rome, originally from Finland, Lubricate, Riley Rainey. Lubricate and I became really good friends. And unfortunately, in her case, the same as with Palm Fritz, they weren't in a terrible accident. They didn't get sick. They just one day, something internal just was like, nope, we're done. And they were gone. I don't know if there's any good way to go necessarily. I guess there's some benefit to maybe having an illness and knowing that it's coming, as opposed to just like, oh, I guess my time is up. But yeah, I miss those guys. I would love to see them out on trail again. And a lot of other hashers, like I'm sure miss them as well.
My favorite thought on this was Keanu Reeves getting asked on the Actors Studio, what do you think happens when we die? And he said, the people that love us will miss us. And that's certainly something in the hash. Departed hashers are dear to all of us, and it's part of the community.
Yeah, one of my little, I have pulled out some stuff, and this is To the Wolf. I've hashed up in Frankfurt a bit and knew him, and they still do the annual run where we go through the spot where he passed on trail and drink a salute to the wolf, which I think is a great tradition.
Such a part of hashing internationally and German hashing. That's another guy. And there are so many that if you meet them once, you remember them.
You remember.
Yeah. Once. Thanks for all your time, and
on, my friend.
On.
To close the circle, here's the hash anthem sung by Mother Hash.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for